The container was logged as agricultural machinery, 16 crates of soil core samplers out of the Sorvath outer belt, 14 intact, one crushed on 3 sides and resealed with docking tape. The last one, Bay 9, row C, had cracked along its lower seam and was making a sound I didn't like. I put my stylus behind my ear and listened. It wasn't mechanical, it wasn't gas bleed. It was breath, slow, measured, and entirely too large for soil core samplers. I should have sealed the bay and called it in. That's the procedure. Instead, I walked to the inspection hatch, pulled the release lever, and swung the panel open. The dragon was sitting in the far left corner of the container with its wings folded flat against its back, watching me. Copper scales, each one the size of my thumbnail on the small ones at the jaw, the size of my palm on the shoulder plates. One wing was folded wrong, the leading edge had a crack running from the first joint down, dried dark at the edges. It was cold in there. I could see that in the way it held itself, weight shifted forward onto its forefeet, very still, the way something conserves heat when it has been cold for too long. It didn't move, neither did I. I picked up my stylus, finished the notation I'd been writing, and said, "I'm going to need to log you." It blinked, once, long amber gold eyes with a vertical slit, the way a cat's eye looks in bright light. I closed the panel, walked to the intake station, and filed an animal in transit hold on Bay 9. Then I called Dock Control. Dock Control told me to seal the bay and flag it for removal. A containment team would be out within the shift. Had I been injured? No. Good, seal the bay. I went back to Bay 9. I didn't seal it. The thing about an open intake report is that it stays in my queue until I sign it off. Station code is clear on that. Nobody touches an active intake bay while the reporting clerk has the log open. I had 22 years on Callan's Gate, and I'd never left a log open for something that wasn't worth logging carefully. I pulled a folding stool from the wall mount, set it up outside the inspection hatch, and sat down. I ate my lunch there, cold noodles from the mess hall. I always ate alone in Bay 9 on night shifts. It was the farthest bay from the supervisor's station, and nobody bothered you. I wasn't thinking anything noble. I was thinking about the crack in its wing and whether it hurt the way a broken rib hurts, where the pain sits in you dully until you move wrong. I ate about half the tin and then, without a great deal of forethought, pushed the hatch open and held it inside. Nothing happened for a while. Then the copper dragon lowered its head, very slowly, and ate from the tin. It was careful. It took what I'd offered and didn't take my hand. Its breath was warm on my wrist. I'd thought it was purely cold from the container, but the body heat underneath that stillness was real, just suppressed. I held the tin until it was done, then took it back and sat with it on my knee. I found out later that 11 days of licensed relic fauna handlers had tried to approach it, and that the Varethi Sorvath clutch line's biometric registry had been tracking a faint metabolic signal the entire time. The copper line goes cold and quiet when it doesn't want to be found. Signal dropped to threshold every time a trained handler came close, until whoever was watching it thought the reading might be a ghost. The signal that came through 4 minutes after I filed my intake notation was a full metabolic spike, feeding response, the first one in 11 days. I didn't know any of that when Supervisor Venn came down the dock corridor at about the 2-hour mark with 2 station safety officers, and told me Bay 9 was being sealed under Dock Ordinance 14, and I needed to step away from the hatch. I didn't step away from the hatch. I explained that Bay 9 had an active open intake report in my queue, that station code precluded interference with active intake bays, and that I hadn't finished the report because I hadn't finished assessing the contents, and I wasn't going to sign off something I hadn't properly assessed. Venn told me the contents were a biohazard. I said I didn't see any indication of biohazard under the transit code definition. He told me it was a wild animal, and wild animals were not within my assessment remit. I said it was logged as agricultural machinery, which put it squarely in my assessment remit until proven otherwise. He told me I was being deliberately obstructive. I agreed that I probably was, and I sat on my stool and I held my ground. I didn't feel particularly brave about it. Ven had been trying to get me moved to a different shift rotation for 3 years, and the safety officers looked embarrassed to be there, and the copper dragon in the container was quiet and still in a way I'd come to understand meant it was listening. I wasn't going to seal the bay with it inside. That was all it was. The courier ship arrived 14 minutes later. I heard it before I saw it, a sound like nothing in the standard arrival register, a harmonic resonance in the dock floor that moved up through the stool legs and into my back. Ven heard it too. The safety officers looked at the roof. The copper dragon's head came up. They came through Bay 9's side entrance, which nobody uses because the manual override is stiff and the station doesn't maintain it. There were 4 of them. The 2 outer ones were large, deep copper, ancient scaled, the kind of old where each scale has grown its own weight and the wings don't fold fully flat anymore, just settle. The one in front of those was younger, with a long interpreter's sash in Varethi formal weave, and it spoke standard with the very precise grammar of someone who has learned it from documents. The 4th one, the one in the center, was old in a way that made the others seem young. Her scales were the color of old embers, copper gone dark with time, each plate edged in a line of gold that had long since stopped being decorative and become structural. She moved with the kind of deliberateness that doesn't come from age and doesn't come from ceremony. It comes from knowing your own weight in the world down to the gram. She looked at the container, then she looked at me. The interpreter said, "The clutch elder wishes to know if it was you who fed him." I said, "If you mean the one in there, yes." The interpreter said, "She asks how." I held up the tin. There was a long pause, the kind of pause that isn't empty. The clutch elder said something in Varethi high register, 2 syllables low, with a harmonic underneath it that I felt in my sternum. The copper dragon in the container answered. Same register, same harmonic. Then it came out of the container and stood beside me, close enough that I could feel the warmth off its shoulder plate. The interpreter said, "The Sorvath clutch elder designates you Varath Sauron. This is the formal title given to the person the heir has chosen to receive sustenance from, in an uncontrolled situation, without coercion or training. It is the highest designation the clutch line extends to a non-Varethi individual. It is not a courtesy title." Ven made a noise behind me. I said, "What does it require of me?" The interpreter said, "Nothing it has not already received." They spent 2 hours on the administrative handover, clutchline jurisdiction over Reth's transport and care, which meant the cracked wing would be properly seen to. Ven found somewhere else to be fairly quickly. The safety officers left when the paperwork cleared their remit. I stayed because my intake report was still open. When the last of the formal documentation was countersigned and the clutch elder's delegation had withdrawn to the courier ship to prepare transit, I signed off the intake report. Cargo contents: 1 juvenile male Varethi Sorvath, clutch designation 7th heir, wing injury noted, handed to clutchline authority per bilateral fauna accord. Status: resolved. I folded the stool back into the wall. Reth was still in the bay. He hadn't gone back into the container. He was sitting where the dock floor got the most of the arc light spill, just outside the container's shadow, in the warmest patch of the deck. I went and sat on the floor with my back against the container, the way you sit when there isn't a stool and you're not going anywhere for a while. I had about 1/3 of my noodles left. I opened the tin and held it where he could reach it. He ate again, the same way as before, careful, unhurried, warm breath on my wrist. When it was done, he settled beside me close, his shoulder against my arm. The cracked wing folded as flat as it could manage. He was still doing the thing where he went quiet and still, but the quality of the quiet was different now. Not cold, not gone to threshold. Just resting. I didn't have anywhere to be until the next intake check. The dock was quiet, the arc lights steady, the floor hard, but I'd sat on worse. After a while, I stopped thinking about whether it made sense and just sat there with the empty tin. In the warmth the two of us were making between us, while the courier ship ticked and settled outside and the night shift went on without us.